Imagine waking up to the sound of splintering wood and foreign voices shouting in the darkness. Your door kicked open by men you've never seen before, and within minutes you're dragged from your bed, chained in the street, watching everything you've ever known burn to the ground. This wasn't a nightmare. This was reality for 237 people in the Irish village of Baltimore on a June night in 1631. And among those captives was Joan Broadbrook, who had never travelled beyond her village walls, and 3 weeks later she would find herself standing on a platform in an Algerian slave market, while strangers examined her body like livestock, because she was now property worth approximately 8 oxen, less valuable than a decent horse. Joan's story isn't unique. It's just one thread in a horror that Europe desperately wants to forget, because between 1530 and 1780, over 1 million Europeans were captured and sold as slaves in North Africa and the Ottoman Empire, and for 250 years the Mediterranean became a hunting ground where Europeans were the prey. If you're new to Vile History, hit that subscribe button and smash the like, because this channel exists to uncover the brutal truths that textbooks bury, the stories that make us uncomfortable, the history that actually happened. The Barbary pirates weren't random criminals. They were state-sponsored raiders operating from bases in Algiers, Tunis, Tripoli and Salé, backed directly by the Ottoman Empire, which took a cut of every slave sold, turning human trafficking into legitimate revenue. This wasn't piracy, this was organised crime on a governmental level, and their fleets would descend on European coast with military precision, sometimes 30 ships at once, attacking at dawn when villages had no chance to defend themselves. Their primary target was always people, because unlike gold, which you sell once, a human being could be sold repeatedly, used, broken, and sold again. In 1627, these corsairs reached Iceland capturing 400 people, and in 1544 Hayreddin Barbarossa attacked the Italian coast and captured 7,000 people in a single summer, which isn't a raid, that's industrial-scale human harvesting. These were calculated operations targeting young women and children because they brought the highest prices, and if you lived on the coast during this period, every night you wondered if tonight was the night you'd wake up to screaming. For 2.5 centuries this was reality, which is why entire coastal villages were abandoned, why people moved inland, why watchtowers were built along every coast. But warnings weren't always enough, because the corsairs adapted, learned which villages had weak defences, bribed local criminals, waited for storms, then struck. Some Europeans called renegades converted and joined the corsairs, and the most infamous was Simon the Dancer, a Dutch captain who became one of the wealthiest corsairs in Algiers by capturing thousands of his own countrymen. Now let me tell you about Maria Teralen, captured in 1731 at 22 while travelling on a merchant ship, and when the pirates boarded they showed no mercy to men over 40, throwing their bodies overboard while chaining the young men and all women, and Maria spent 17 days in the cargo hold chained to 40 other women in a space so cramped they couldn't lie down, sitting in complete darkness surrounded by the smell of vomit and urine. No light, no air, just the ship creaking and other women crying. Some women died during the crossing, and Maria heard 7 splashes as bodies were thrown into the sea, and one woman beside her stopped eating on the 3rd day, stopped drinking on the 5th. By the 8th day she was gone, but Maria sat chained to her corpse for hours. When they reached Algiers, Maria hadn't seen sunlight in over 2 weeks, so the light felt like needles in her eyes, and she saw the white walls of Algiers, then the slave market. Captives were taken to public baths, washed, then sorted like cattle, with strong young men sent to the galleys where most died within 5 years. Educated men were sold as tutors, children as servants, older women to domestic work, but young women between 15 and 30 were the most valuable because they were destined for harems, and before the sale came the inspection, where women stood on platforms while buyers examined them, squeezing their arms, pulling open their mouths, examining every inch of skin. In many markets, women were put on full display with nothing hidden, buyers running their hands over bodies that didn't belong to them, and French friar Pierre Dain documented in 1634 that Christian women were inspected like animals, that buyers touched them everywhere, that young women cried but resistance brought immediate beatings, and this happened in broad daylight, witnessed by thousands, completely legal, completely accepted. Now imagine being Joan on that platform, a young woman from a tiny Irish village where her biggest worry had been the harvest, where she'd never been touched by any man, and now strangers examined her, their hands on her body, and she was sold to Turkish merchant Ahmed for 8 oxen. The journey from Algiers to Istanbul took 6 weeks with Joan in the cargo hold, with 20 other European women, none speaking English, so communication was impossible. But fear needed no translation, and when they arrived, slaves removed her European clothes and burned them, bathed her in perfumed water, dressed her in Ottoman clothing until she didn't recognize herself. That night, Ahmed visited her room, and Joan had never been with a man, had never been alone with a man who wasn't family, but Ahmed spoke no English and didn't need to. Years later, Joan sent a letter to her family, one of the only first-hand accounts we have, writing that she could not describe what she suffered that first night, only that she wished for death 1,000 times, but death did not come, and every night after was the same. That was the reality of the harem, not silk cushions and perfumed gardens, not exotic luxury, but captivity, forced submission, survival, and the psychological torture of knowing this was forever, that there was no rescue coming, just endless days turning into endless years. Some women went mad and screamed at walls, others survived by creating routines, remembering songs from home, but most simply went numb because it was easier. The daily life of a slave depended on who owned her, but patterns were universal. All Christian slaves were pressured to convert, even though conversion didn't make them free, they remained property. But it improved their status, while those who resisted were punished with beatings, food deprivation, isolation for weeks. They were forced to learn Turkish or Arabic, and those who learned quickly received better treatment, while those who couldn't were considered stubborn and punished more severely. And crucially, no European slave had legal rights. She could not testify in court, could not own property, could not refuse her owner anything. She was in every legal sense an object. Most ended up in brutal domestic work with 16-hour days where a burned meal meant a beating, or concubinage where if the woman was young, her owner used her whenever he wanted, and if a concubine gave birth to a son, her status improved but daughters were worth less, or a sale where many slaves were bought and sold multiple times, with each sale being a new trauma. But there was one destination feared above all, which was the imperial harem of the Ottoman Sultan in Istanbul, a massive complex inside Topkapi Palace with over 400 rooms holding between 500 and 1,000 women, all property. To reach the imperial harem, a slave had to be extraordinarily beautiful, young, usually between 12 and 18, and survive a brutal selection, and once inside, training lasted years as they learned Turkish, Ottoman etiquette, music, dance, transforming them into refined companions for the Sultan. But here's the brutal truth that shatters every fantasy. Of the 500 to 1,000 women there, only a small fraction would ever see the Sultan, and of those, only a handful would spend the night with him, while the rest lived in permanent limbo, spending years waiting for a summons that never came, growing older in gilded rooms, watching their beauty fade. Ottoman records mention a European slave identified only as Francesca, who entered the harem in 1650 at 15, and died there in 1702 at 67, spending 52 years inside those walls, never seeing the Sultan once, and when she died she was buried with no name, only a number. The records listed her as slave, number 847, origin Franco, status deceased, 52 years reduced to a number and 2 words. So why did Europe allow this for 250 years? And the answer is shameful, because Europe was divided and weak. Religious wars consumed resources, states didn't cooperate because they were fighting each other. Some had profitable trade agreements with the Ottoman Empire and didn't want to risk those over captured peasants. Plus some Europeans profited as renegades and merchants, and ransoming captives became its own industry, favouring the wealthy, where a rich merchant's daughter might be rescued within a year, but a poor fisherman's wife might wait forever. Maria Taralan was lucky, because after 8 years her family sold everything to raise the ransom, and she was freed in 1739 and returned to Holland. But she discovered her fiancé had married another woman. Her mother had died of grief, her father was financially ruined, and her community rejected her because they saw her as contaminated, and no one wanted to marry a woman who had been a slave. Maria lived alone working as a seamstress, and in her diary she wrote that she would have preferred to die in captivity than return, because at least there her shame was private, but here it was public and eternal. The situation only changed in the 19th century, when France bombed Corsair bases and in 1830 invaded Algeria and ended the system, but by then over 1 million people had been captured, and most never returned. Joan Broadbrook spent years in captivity, and when finally freed, she tried to return to Ireland, but Baltimore was gone. Her home, her life, her family, all erased. And for decades her name was read in Baltimore's church during prayers for captives. Every Sunday her name spoken, every Sunday no answer, until they stopped reading it, and she was forgotten. This isn't just the story of Joan, or Maria, or Francesca. It's the story of over 1 million European women whose lives were stolen by a system of human trafficking that operated openly for centuries. And the coasts of Ireland still remember the night of 1631. The archives of Istanbul still hold the names of the slaves, and now you remember too, because every civilization has dark chapters like this one. Stories buried and waiting to be told. So which culture should we explore next? Let me know in the comments.